Amy Adams. Amy Adams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, what reports has he received on the government's financial position?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, today the Treasury released the government's financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2010. Compared with the previous year ending 30th of June 2009, government spending was about the same. Tax revenue was down, and both the operating deficit before gains and losses and the residual cash deficit were higher than the previous year. Overall, the government's fiscal situation remains tight. It's important that we continue to take balanced and considered decisions to control future spending, get debt under control and return the budget to surplus.
Amy Adams.
To the Minister, how has the government helped the economy make the necessary adjustments in the aftermath of the recession?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the government has provided significant support for New Zealanders to protect people from the sharpest edges of recession. For example, based on the latest forecast, the government's annual cash balance was $2.1 billion in surplus in 2007-8, and in 2010-11 there will be a cash deficit of $13 billion. That is a $15 billion turnaround. This amounts to very considerable fiscal stimulus, where effectively the government is borrowing money from overseas lenders and pumping it into the economy to proceed with infrastructure investment, to maintain core government services and to continue with transfers to households such as Working for Families, interest-free student loans and early childhood education subsidies.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, to the Minister, when the government's books have deteriorated from a $2 billion surplus under Labor to a $13 billion deficit under him, how can he possibly afford another $14 billion in tax cuts for people who don't need them when New Zealanders do not have jobs?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, that's the opposite of what the opposition usually argue, which is that the government isn't running big enough deficits and we should be running more job schemes and wasting more money on bureaucracy. The government has taken a considered and balanced approach. We are running a $13 billion deficit this year for the reasons I outlined before. The tax package that we have implemented is intended to rebalance this economy so we can have sustainable jobs, less debt, more exports, savings and investments.
Amy Adams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister. How are households responding to the government's program to encourage work, savings and productive investment?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the early signs of rebalancing in the economy are encouraging if we look at the behaviour of households. This can be seen from official data showing movements in New Zealand families' equity in their own homes. Between 2003 and 2008, households effectively borrowed about $7 billion against their houses, which was spent on consumption. This has been called equity withdrawal. There has now been a marked turnaround. So now instead of households borrowing against their houses to go on overseas trips, buy second cars and flat screen TVs, in fact now households are paying their debt down to the tune of about $5 billion. That is, New Zealanders are now saving $5 billion, where previously they had been overspending by $7 billion. That's a dramatic turnaround.
Amy Adams.
Thank you. To the Minister, what does this change in household savings behaviour mean for the nature of the current economic recovery?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, we need to keep in mind the state the previous government left this economy in, which was an economy dependent on excessive government spending and excessive borrowing. Now that the impact of the global recession, the New Zealand recession and government policy means that New Zealanders are being very careful with their spending to the extent that private consumption as a share of the economy is actually dropping. So we are going to see a recovery where people are careful with their spending and paying down debt, and where the growth in the economy is driven by strong export prices. That kind of recovery will give us sustainable jobs instead of the ones that were dependent on excessive government spending and excessive debt.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, can he confirm that his supposed rebalancing is occurring on the back of high unemployment, low or no wage growth, increasing prices and a stalling economy, all of which are making it harder for ordinary Kiwi families to make ends meet?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wish the member had cared about that when he was in government, because the answer to the question is no. But that member needs to remember in the last year he was in office, which was meant to be the best of times, real wages in New Zealand actually dropped. And that was before the global financial crisis. Inflation was 5.1% in 2008.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, when he told reporters this morning that the half-year budget update in December was unlikely to contain positive growth, was that an admission that after telling New Zealanders for 2 years to tighten their belts they would get an aggressive recovery, that they're going to have to wait just a few more years longer?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I pointed out in the answers to earlier questions, New Zealanders have decided to tighten their belts because they know that the fairyland of the economy that government was running simply couldn't last. They know that we couldn't keep borrowing against our houses in order to fund overseas trips, that we couldn't afford to keep paying higher taxes than necessary to fund billions of dollars of wasteful government spending under Labor.
Rahui Katane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, is the reason
Order. I apologise to the Honourable Member, but the previous issues dealt with. I've called Rahui Katane. A little courtesy would be appreciated. Rahui Katane.
Thank you. To the Minister, is the government's financial position the reason why Linwood Housing New Zealand is telling whānau in Christchurch that they have no more tarpaulins to give out?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, if the member may be referring to an aspect of the earthquake recovery effort. If there are particular issues there where people's obvious needs aren't being met, then we're quite happy to follow up on that. I'll be in Christchurch myself tomorrow and very happy to follow up.
Question number 2, the Honourable Annette King.
Thank